Welcome to another episode of Angels, Positivity, and Love. We bring you amazing guests, incredible insights, authors, psychics, healers, doctors, actors, all over the world. We're super fortunate today to have two exceptional individuals who've been following their life paths for quite some time together, going back to 1988 and even earlier. We have Dr. Raymond Moody, Paul Perry, extensive backgrounds. I'm about to look down to pages and pages of background for you, but they have a new book out. You can see it behind Paul Perry right now. And here's another copy of it. It's there. I'm going to say for Raymond, it's around number 13 or so. There's a foreword done by Dr. Eben Alexander, who was just on this show, episode 35 in September with Karen Newell. And they took Steps with Angels, I'll mention, for 40 minutes or so, doing stuff that you need to check out. Both Karen and Eben have come back on solo in October, November. Check out those episodes as well. I'd like to welcome Raymond and Paul to the show. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Michael, and thanks to the folks listening in too.
And Paul, thank you very much for coming on.
Oh, it's great to be here.
It is. Paul, you've got such an incredible background. I'm going to jump to yours first, if I could. You've co-written literally 4 New York Times bestsellers. That number may have gone up. You've done some with Raymond and some other folks. You've been studying near-death, afterlife, and so on for quite some time, but you've also done other stuff. You've done a film and a book about Salvador Dali, and you were knighted in Portugal. You received Portugal's Order of St. Michael of the Wing. And again, you have an incredible writing background, magazine writing, other topics besides near-death, the afterlife. So very, very storied and very seasoned and very experienced for what you do. So thank you for being a part of all this. You've done a service for humanity and for our comfort zone understanding of what really is impossible to grasp at another level.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, on to Raymond. Raymond, you are, I came up with the expression, and I'm sure someone else already said it. There's nothing I say that's original, but you guys are the godfathers of NDE, SDE. I didn't know that abbreviation existed today. That's shared death experiences, I believe. Don't mispronounce that. NDEs, even out-of-body experience stuff. You've been doing this, Raymond, for a super long time, close to 50 years. You have... and by the way, your book is published by both Atria, who I love, but also Beyond Words Publishing. So big thanks to Richard Cohn for choosing this path 40 years ago, almost to the day. He has put out books by Deepak Chopra, James Twyman, Dr. Sue Morter, Gene Houston, Don Miguel Ruiz. One of his authors in his stable for the last 40 years has done my service, has got a testimonial up, blah, blah, blah. And I wanted to mention... Raymond, you've got lifeafterlife.com as your website. People can go there and learn about both your backgrounds plus a third person. Raymond, who is that third person? Can you put context to her real quick from your website?
Lisa Smart.
Yes.
Yeah, Lisa is a person who, set up that website some years ago, and sadly, and she has written a book, fascinating book on the dying words of people, and that was her area of interest. And sadly, right now she has some health problems with her daughter, which are keeping her busy. But that is the connection. Yeah.
We'll ask the audience to send positive vibes her way, or supportive vibes, I should say. Okay. Yeah. Raymond, you're a philosopher, a psychiatrist, a physician, an author. You literally might have and may have and did coin the term near-death experience and more, the concept of the afterlife. You've been studying it, and you have been on a particular trajectory because you knew what you knew way back when, but I think you found that it's shifted over time as your own consciousness.
Oh, yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit?
No doubt about it. I came across near-death experiences when I was 18 years old, but the background I brought to it was that my interest was in astronomy. My dad at that time was cynical about religion. Religion was not a point of reference to me. I went to the University of Virginia to study astronomy, but I'd gotten interested in philosophy in high school, took a philosophy course my first semester, and that's where I found out about near-death experiences and the Plato's Republic. And just reading the first few pages of the Republic, I said, I'm going to be a philosophy major. And the book ends with this incredible story of a man who had died in warfare, but was set up on the funeral pyre and came back. And this was the first time I had ever realized that the notion of an afterlife was other than a comic premise. I literally thought it was something that cartoons were about. I mean, I didn't get that people took it seriously. But the fact that Plato took it seriously impressed me. And I asked my professor that, what is this? And he said, yeah, these early Greek philosophers studied cases of people who had apparently died but who were revived and had these experiences, and that there was two schools of thought about it. Plato looked at it and said, oh, this is an indicator of an afterlife. But Democritus, who had figured out that there are atoms about the same time, said, oh, this is the body appears dead, but there's still biological activity going on. There's no such thing as a moment of death. This is, and the same debate we have today, oxygen deprivation but that was my entree to it, and I was riveted, but it never occurred to me that might anything to do with the modern world until 3 years later. I met Dr. George Ritchie, who at that time was a professor of psychiatry at the University of Virginia. And I learned in one of my philosophy classes that Dr. Ritchie had had this experience. Of course, went to hear him speak, was blown away by him. I didn't know what to make of his experience, but he to this day was the finest person I ever knew. Then, and when I was still an undergraduate, I heard one more story, but then I got my PhD in philosophy at the age of 23, which anybody old enough as me would realize there was something really wrong with somebody who would have a PhD at age 23, and there was. And then at age 31 had in addition an MD. But I was just totally focused on the book world and so when I was a professor of philosophy, 69 to 72, I began to hear these from my students, from my colleagues, asked around to civic clubs. You hear it and it was then I went to medical school, and as you say, it was a long process. I always realized so from the time of medical school, I realized it didn't have anything to do with oxygen deprivation to the brain. One of my own medical school professors told me that she had this identical experience of being out of her body and seeing from above as she was resuscitating her mother, and that she saw her mother in spirit form, saw this tunnel and so on. But, my and people around the bedside have the same experience. So it's not oxygen deprivation to the brain. Something else is going on, but I didn't know what. I realized from the beginning that it's not oxygen deprivation to the brain, but the fact that it's not oxygen deprivation to the brain does not mean that it is life after death. I just didn't know, and I'm fully aware of the logical reasons propounded by great philosophers why this is, in the current context, can't be proven by a logical procedure. But where I came with it, Michael, was I just gave up. I just, I've tried to think my way out of it, because the fun thing to me about inquiry is not to try to find some reason to think something, but to think of every reason you can why it's not so. And because that's the proper, to me, way of inquiry. And where I am is I just give up. I can't think my way out of it, to my utter astonishment. And still counterintuitively to me, there's an afterlife. And the way I have given up is that I cannot figure out any way out of my personal thought that if I had an injury of some sort, heaven forbid, would I put my body in the hands of Eben Alexander or Dr. Jeffrey O'Driscoll, if you know him, or Dr. Anthony Chicoria, if you know him. And I could go on with my medical colleagues who've had this, whose medical expertise I would trust completely. And so I noticed that all of them unanimously say that their experience was not only real, but more real than this thing we're going through now. So literally, I give up. I can't think my way out of that. It's like apparently, as I gather, that there's an afterlife.
That's beautiful. Paul, we're coming to you in 1 second. I'm going to mention one little thing. It's going to tie more into indigenous or holistic or wellness or the spiritual woo-woo stuff. But this is in a way about opening openness. When you're in your heart, you're connected to the universe. I'll leave it at that, except it's so much simpler than people realize or think. And that's because it's not about thinking, but less thinking. And I felt that that tied in with what Raymond was saying. There's a little bit of a trust factor, letting go. Call it faith, but it could be religious, non-religious. To me, it's the same letting go. It's just, are you willing to get out of here to here? It might be 2 lifetimes or just 2 days. If it's a rough 2 days, you might actually get here faster. Paul,
So
tell us.
kind of a form of surrender in a lot of ways. You have to surrender to the moment, surrender to those subtle feelings that you might have, and you can't intellectualize them. I think that's really where we're at in a lot of ways with near-death experiences and shared death experiences, but not totally anymore, because they're becoming more accepted and they're becoming more real. I don't know what else to put other than that. They're becoming more real.
Another thing that's happening due largely to the technological developments of CPR in the 60s and 70s, that the afterlife is now becoming integrated in a whole new way with this life. Because almost any gathering you go to now, there's going to be somebody there who said, I almost died. I got out of my body, and who talked to you about it. And anybody is in a situation where they can just talk around among their own acquaintance networks and hear stories of people who have been to some other realm of existence. And that is having an effect in the what was in 1975 extraordinary.
Yeah, you were going to catch a lot of flack in 1975. Paul, you've been doing this at least since 1988, which is 35 years ago.
5 years ago,
yeah. So in this time, what are you either thankful for? What was a moment where you had to go pinch yourself and be like, did that just happen? Because, you've got reason speaks against everything we're talking about. Welcome to, humanity, the eternal questions. But you've got a big heart, obviously. What has been a moment that you just shake your head over, or you've watched yourself grow in your own awareness? Can you share one of those moments that even today you go on a walk and you're still like, I can't believe that happened, or something?
Yeah. For one thing, I'm a natural explorer. So, that exploration just doesn't involve the earth or the oceans. It involves the other side. And what I found is that I think everybody has a perception of the other side. I can give you an example. When we first started writing together, it was the first book we wrote was The Light Beyond. And I did something that I now call the Denny's experiment. And it was that I went to a movie with several friends, and it was late. Denny's are best late at night, I got to tell you. So we went to this movie. We late at night we went to Denny's, and I was talking to the people at the table with me about near-death experiences. And a couple of them said, well, that's just BS. That really doesn't happen. And I said, okay. So I stood up in the Denny's. There were about 20 people there. And I said, I'm working on a book on near-death experiences, which, by admitting you're a book author, kept me from getting shot probably. But, I said, I'm working on a book on near-death experiences. I described them. And I said, has anyone in here had any experience with that? Have you had one, or do you have any relatives who have had one? So there were about 20 people in there. About 15 people had experiences, or they had knew relatives, our loved ones, our friends who had experiences. And they're 15 of the people were able to tell an experience that they had that related to near-death experiences. And that told me right there that people are really interested in the other side. It also told me that in their particular circle, it never really came up.
Hmm.
And to be able to bring it up to them freed them to speak, to talk about the experience, near-death experiences that they had experienced in one way or another. And I think that's really the beauty of what Raymond did with Life After Life, and also what we're doing with this book. With Life After Life, he didn't discover the near-death experience. That's been going on since Homo sapiens began, and probably before. But he named it and he defined it. And that in a very real way legitimizes it. There you go. And that legitimizes this subject with people. And it also makes people realize that, hey, I had an experience like this and I'm not nuts.
Hmm.
Medical doctors are now naming and defining it. And the same thing is true with proof, is that a shared death experience is very different from a near-death experience. You know, a near-death experience is a subjective experience. If you have a near-death experience, you're the only one that has it. You're the only one that can honestly describe it in a first-person way, right?
Hmm.
And that makes it a subjective experience. A shared death experience is when a dying person shares their death experience with at least one other person. And that makes it an objective experience. And that brings this whole field into the field of objectivity.
Well, you're
Is that
arming me with lots of scientific language here because I help people have a direct experience, but it's only subjective if it's individual. But I help people do it together, and they can also meet their relatives, not just or loved ones, not just angels, fairies, a jinn,
oh
and a
sure.
lot of religious, non-religious
And
figures.
it doesn't mean they shouldn't be believed if they've had an NDE and
Yeah.
they're the only ones who talk about it. This is more well, for one of a better word, more of a scientific way of looking at it.
Yeah.
Is that we want to open this up to proving that consciousness leaves the body.
And Raymond, where have you seen with 50 years of this? I mean, literally, when we say godfather of near-death experiences, a lot of the expressions and lingo that we use today, and we just take it for granted. You've been doing the hard work interviewing hundreds and hundreds of folks. You've done just tons of research on this. But what I wanted to ask is, there was a lot of resistance or just outright rejection of the possibility of this, back then, decades ago, and today in some quadrants. Where have you seen the most adjustment, and that has gone with the flow, gone with a bigger universe, gone with the concept of multidimensionality a little bit, is how I'm going to use the word, because, the UFO, UAP crowd these days are actually in some ways pushing this in their own way without knowing it, and intersecting with your world, just that life or the universe may be bigger than we ever realized through this thinking
Absolutely.
structure. So where have you seen the most, being adept or adopting to the greater possibility? Which organizations or which industries?
I think I'm not much of an organization person, but what I see is this has just been a natural process. It's like what used to be the afterlife is being integrated with this life because there's so many people who have been there. And you can't find a big collective gathering of any size now where there's not somebody. And also, I've noticed the older you get, the more the number of people your age that the greater and greater percentage of them have had some experience of going over to another world. So even though the logic, the conventional logic is not on board yet, it's like the afterlife is being integrated into this life because there's no longer a firm boundary if you know a lot of people yourself who've been in and out of it.
Right.
Like you think of the people who have over a number of years had multiple near-death experiences, often usually because of a chronic heart problem. But, there have been people who've had multiple trips over there. So, it's the afterlife barrier has become permeable now. It's, and very articulate people are bringing back whole new ways to talk about this.
Yeah.
And that will, progress, because there's whole new ways of thinking that now that about these things, that once they get integrated into the experiential picture, it will be a process of kind of like everybody will kind of wake up that, oh yeah, well, there's this afterlife. Is how it will happen.
Paul, you wanted to add something.
Yeah, I think the biggest adjustment, if you're looking for a profession that's adjusted quite a bit to near-death experiences, would be the medical profession. When we first started writing these books, medical doctors wanted nothing to do with this subject, for the most part. Not all. There's always the outliers. And they really wanted, for the most part, nothing to do with it. A lot of that has to do with what Raymond just mentioned, is resuscitation techniques have changed. So people are able to go deeper and deeper into death, if you will, and come back. And they've had these extraordinary experiences that even the most skeptical physician can't ignore. But over the years now, we've had more and more doctors talk about their experiences or ones that they've heard from their patients. And this book is full of that. This book is full of medical doctors talking about their experiences, which I found completely amazing.
And that's so Life After Life is where they can go, obviously, for the .com, the website, lifeafterlife.com, but also just Amazon. Punch in Raymond Moody, Paul Perry. You're going to be all set for finding the entire, last 35 years of books that you two have worked on together. I've got to mention, I'm going to do a public service announcement. Be sure to like, share, subscribe here. And there's another one, comment as well. It helps us grow this show. We're a tiny show, but incredible guests, way beyond the caliber than we deserve. And you two are no exception for this. Thank you for being on. I have a sub show that's launching in probably a week. It's not weekly per se, but it's whenever we record. And it's someone you may know who's my premiere episode. It's going to be called the APL, which is Angels, Positivity, and Love, this show. APL Spotlight Series. It's a deeper dive where you see, guests take steps on the show, listening, smelling, hearing, on the other side, angels, their loved ones, whoever. That's super important. It's great. But we get into it more. And sometimes the person shows us something. So I know Karen Newell and Dr. Eben Alexander have talked, and we'll get this solidified for the spring at the latest, maybe sooner, some sort of a meditation technique, but you'll see them take steps so you can feel better about the taking the chance to be in your heart. You do it when you step on a tennis court, to do yoga, to cook in the kitchen, or sing, maybe in public. But the point is, that's all we're talking about for the crazy step of letting go and being a little more like living in the moment. But this APL Spotlight Series, there's Ingrid Hankala, PhD, 3-time near-death experience, NASA oceanographer, U.S. Navy oceanographer. You may have come across her before. I've had on the show Michelle Clare, C-L-A-R-E, and she's a 3-time near-death experience person as well. They're super, super fantastic at communicating. And so I wanted to mention, we've had plenty of near-death experience folks out of the 50 episodes in 2023 come on the show.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I'd love to talk to Ms. Clare.
Yes, I'll make sure to get those introductions to you. And you too, if you'd like, you're welcome to come back on that Spotlight Series. It'll be in the spring, winter. And again, bring your projects, your books, anything you want to show us. Let's get back, though, on track in terms of near-death experiences, shared death experiences. Can you relate one that you still can't get your head around, but that is a big one? You are thankful for it because it reminds you not to do what we all do. We take everything too seriously. If I'm in a career, I was in New York for 18 years, public relations, making almost $250,000, working for $1 billion law firm. Super happy, enthusiastic. I don't know any better. Thank God for that. That's what allows me to do this. Bottom line is, we all get, that sense of self-importance, or we get stuck on externals. It could be how somebody treated us, relationships, health, you name it. Can you give us that classic, either it's happened to you or you've heard about it and you trust that other person, that it keeps a certain levity and a certain love of life flowing in you? You love remembering this particular shared experience. Raymond, Paul.
You gotta go, Raymond, or?
Well, I guess, in an odd way, this is a shared death experience, but it's more a shared birth experience. But that has to do with the death experience.
Right.
I was the first person living person I heard a near death experience from, Michael, was Dr. George Ritchie, who was a professor of psychiatry at the University of Virginia when I was an undergraduate there. And I should say that George is from Richmond, Virginia, and that my parents are from Porterdale, Georgia. Okay, now, I heard Dr. Ritchie's story in, I think it was February of 1965, the first living person I ever heard this from. And his experience took place at Camp Barkley, Texas in December 1943, when he was pronounced dead of double lobar pneumonia and was found apparently dead in the bed. But they don't know how long he had been apparently dead, but it was 9 minutes later was when they injected the adrenaline in his heart. But he had this amazing experience that it just, hearing him just transformed my life, and that set me off on this process. Now, I didn't have any more communication with Dr. Ritchie for 10 years. When in 1975, when the book was getting ready to, Life After Life was really getting ready to be published, I called Dr. Ritchie and asked him if I could dedicate my book to him. That was the only contact. In January of 1976, I graduated from medical school at Medical College of Georgia. But I decided to go back to Charlottesville for my psychiatry residency. So then in March of 1976, I went up to Charlottesville to do my residency interviews. And while there, just called Dr. Ritchie Heim, and he, very nicely, invited us to dinner and so had this wonderful contact. And then the next day, I flew back home to Macon, Georgia, where my parents lived, and who were taking care of my kids, the kids. And so by then, my father had heard a tape of Dr. Ritchie's experience. And so when I mentioned that I'd seen Dr. Ritchie the day before, my father said, said, "That's really interesting. Camp Barkley, Texas, December 1943. You know, I was there, and so were you." My mom and dad had moved to Camp Barkley in early September 1943. I was conceived late September 1943. George's experience was, I think, December 24th. My mom and dad moved away from Camp Barkley on December 29th, 1943. So I was there in utero when that experience took place that changed my life. And I think of that as a shared death experience, because this is just, now I don't want to bore people, but there have been 2 other significant events in my life, like critical, life-changing events, where George Ritchie has just materialized it, in the most remarkable way. So, in some way, I was influenced by this person and experience while I was still in the womb. And that is pretty remarkable to me. And I could go on and give you a couple of other things like that George just suddenly appeared. Incomprehensible.
I love Zen expressions. I know it's getting off track a little, but it's not, because they find a way to get you out of the head into the heart. And there's that expression from Joe Shu. It's one of the books up there. What happens when the blind turtle finds a plank and the teacher says it was no accident? So I like that a lot. Paul, do you have one more thing you can share with us. It may be just a
Yes.
place around the world that resonated or another experience you could share. That would be wonderful.
Yeah. This happened when my mother was dying of dementia. I was preparing to leave the house for the care facility when I got a phone call from Dr. Vernon Neppy, who at the time was the head of neuropharmacology at University of Washington. And I had worked with Vernon about 5 years earlier on a book project, but when we finished with that, I had not talked to him for 5 years for whatever reason. And he called me and he said, I was sitting here this morning reading the newspaper, and a female voice told me to call Paul Perry, and I ignored it.
Oh,
And an hour later, I was reading the sports section, and this voice came back and said, "Call Paul Perry." And so I'm calling you, and I don't know why. What's going on in your life?
oh,
And I said, "Oh, my mother's dying. She's dying of Alzheimer's." And I talked to him because that's his specialty. You know, he was doing the medication and treatment of primarily of Alzheimer's. And I asked him if there was anything new on the market that we could try. And we talked for a while about that. But in the middle of that conversation, I got a call from the care facility, and they said, "Your mother just died." And to me, that's a type of shared death experience for sure. Why she routed it through Vernon, I have no idea. But to me, that's a shared death experience.
oof.
And that shows the broadness of a shared death experience.
Uh, I'm going to go a little bit again on a tangent. I've lost both parents. 1970, when I was 2, Navy fighter pilot type. He had just turned 26, died off the coast of Italy in an F-4 Phantom. No body recovered. They put him into Arlington in 98. All the adults got to enjoy that. They shut down, or sorry, experienced the honor of that, proper burial in the missing man section. Shut down all the airports. It was front page above the fold of the Washington Post. When I was turning 23, my mom passed. So I was sitting in her chair at that ceremony, full military honors. But it was their time to go, and hundreds of people have seen them since, because I help people get the full on. But you can also see angels in full on human form, more like Star Trek, where Kirk and Spock are the angels. They got to decide, hey, we don't want to interfere, but if you ask for it, my opinion is you can have full on human interaction. They pinch you, you pinch them. I usually get scrambled if it happens to me. It's a lot. It's a lot. You have to be an adult, be able to handle all that energy flow. For me, I'm a happy guy, but I get skitzed out as much as the next person when a lot of energy comes in. But here's my mom and dad, and this is how they show to people in their 20s. And again, you can have that joint experience. So I'm coming from it on the experiencer side. I like to provide an experience to people. I stay out of it, all languages, all dialects. And I think more important than Telugu or Hindi or Japanese, which is just right there shocking, that and I don't see the questions or answers. So 48 pages, 9 hours is the record. But I think the most important thing is you don't have any privacy. You're not getting judged. The universe, whether it's light beings, angels, your relatives, loved ones, they just know how to phraseology everything, say it, phrase it the right way so that it resonates the most here. You hear it the way you need to hear it to get the love you need to experience. And I'm going to go big picture here. The $1 million, well, let's go bigger. We're in modern day times, 2023. So that inflation million isn't what it used to be. Let's go to the $100 million question. Love more, allow more, more kindness, gentleness, compassion. Plato has some quotes about that, that awareness is in all of man. And I might be giving a 2014 Plato quote. Forgive me, you can meet him. But there's just many different levels of compassion right now in our heart. Anyone can be in their heart and live and love more. It may not happen this lifetime. Can you give me your philosophical view, Paul, and philosophical view, Raymond? You're the professional philosopher here, about the big picture, compassion for man, humanity's growth, that whole thing.
Yeah. Plato said, he said, we are God's toys. And he said if you think about it, the life of a human being is not a very important thing. He said, we are God's toys. And he said, and the best way to live this life is to sort of play at it. And, that's what I was for a year, I had a wonderful experience at being the geriatric psychiatrist in a small community where in a small community, you got to have some provision so that the mayor or the chief of police or the local celebrities don't have to show up at the front door of the mental health clinic. So, out of politeness, a provision is made. And who's going to be it this year? Well, Raymond is the oldest resident, and he wrote this book. Everybody, so I was it. And there was a few demented ones, but it was mostly situational stress or mainly loneliness, because I wanted somebody to talk to. And during that year, I repeatedly heard the same insight. Yeah, Raymond, the older I get, the more this. When I look back at my life, I get this impression that it's like it's been a play or a movie or a drama or a novel or a story, a script. And it's I think this is what the key is, that this thing we're in, consciousness itself is a narrative phenomenon. Whenever some new event happens to you, what do? You weave it into your continuing life story. And God, at the end of this, when the action stops and you freeze frame and you're watching the whole show again instantaneously, not just from your perspective, but from the perspective of the other characters.
Mm.
What we're in is the movies. Now, I would say that I know as a logician, if somebody listening to this has studied logic, they will know that's the one of the 13 original fallacies that Aristotle addressed in his Handbook of Fallacies, which is that literalizing a metaphor, right? That what you do is what Raymond is doing is he's taking one aspect of the human experience, namely the theater, and projecting it out as a model of the whole, and that's a logical fallacy, right? However, yeah, I say it happened the other way around. That the reason we have the theater is that people like Aeschylus and Sophocles and Euripides, being reflective people, had realized that feature of human life, and because of a series of events, like they had a chorus which was traditional where they'd sing the old story. For some unknown reason, Thespis stepped out of the chorus, spoke his own lines, created a sensation. But what are the Greeks about? Competition. Let's have a contest. Who can write the best one of these? Right? First winner, Aeschylus, still being performed. And now then it's Sophocles, and now there's two, and it's like, and then he's the second, and then the third big winner, Euripides. Then it's the cast. That came from the fact that people like Aeschylus and Euripides and others realize, just like my patients, when you look back at life, you see the story-like quality of it.
Mm.
And so I think that's why David Hume said that the only sort of view of the afterlife that he thought a rational person could entertain would be reincarnation. And he doesn't say why, but I bet it's because, he was a historian and he knew the power of narrative and the role of narrative in human affairs. So that would make sense to him because reincarnation is the most story-like aspect of the afterlife, right? And so that's where I am on it. That the personal identity is in connection with this. I've talked with a lot of actors, and I ask them, it's like, what do you do when you play a role? And some of them say, well, I know from my training, when you do like this, it means that. Or so it's just like I go through and I do these techniques. And others say, well, I just become the person and write and there I noticed there's these two, and some are in the middle, but I've noticed most of the ones I know, it's one or the other. And I think that's how we all are in life. Some people, sort of act by the rules and the techniques, but other people get really immersed in it, right? But that in the end, it's all the same thing. Beverly Sills told me, she said, Raymond, she said, she was famous for this one role. I don't know. She was delighted that I had no idea who she was. And we had a great time. But she said, she said that this one role, I forgot what it was that she was played. And then she said that night she remembers when she walked off the stage the last time for that role. Then flash forward years later, she had a near-death experience. And she said, Raymond, the closest analogy in my life that I could say to you to explain what that experience, the near-death experience was like, was when it was that night I walked off the stage after acting that role. And that's what the Hindus have arrived at independently, that this is a theater we're in.
And Paul, we're coming to you in 1 second, but I need to mention episode 3 of the series this year. We had a ballerina on from the Berlin State Opera. Incredible talent. You don't get there without being amazing. But she mentioned by the time she got into the South Carolina, one of the main cities, I'm forgetting the name of not Wilmington, but one of the operas there in North or South Carolina. She had a moment where she was at a stage in her life, though, where she was rejecting it a little bit, but she got assisted on stage to get through a performance where she doesn't remember dancing at all. And she thinks it was angels helping her. But she did describe taking time before every performance in Berlin. Before people filtered in, she'd lie on the stage, look up and see movement. But again, she was somewhat detached. The brain wasn't allowing her to appreciate it fully. So it took her like another decade to allow for that. And I'll also mention the prior episode to yours coming out, your episode 50. So welcome to a new year, December 31st of 2023. But if you go a week back, public service announcement, you can watch Australian actor Ian Stenlake from Stingers, from Sea Patrol. You can see it on Amazon. Check out that series. Very safe, good family fun to watch an Australian series, the Australian Navy. And he also was just in Elvis at the Sydney National Theatre in September. So very fun gentleman. I'm excited, again, to have him presented to the audience. I wanted to do 2 quotes for you. Here's the proper quote from Plato in 2014. You'd have to allow for listening through time or the universe, and there is no time and space. Compassion is within all, just many levels of awareness in mankind. Thought that was a beautiful quote. And I'm going to add one more thing from the Big Mary. I'm not religious or non-religious or anything else, but love isn't everything. Open your eyes to see love. And I thought that was a very gentle quote. And a photo of Plato, people can see the old man's face. No hugs for him. They're sweaty. Fist pumps fine. Paul, what's your take on all this as well? I know you had something to say.
Well, I was actually going to say that I would love to have Raymond tell the Eric Pignani story.
Ooh, please do.
Pianist? Yeah. The guy you would love is Eric Pagani. I think he used to be on PBS as their classical music expert many years ago. That was before I knew him, though. But I met Eric in the 80s, and he is just one of the most gentle and sweet people I've ever known in my life. And he is a Walt Disney fan, which is we both love Donald Duck and Disney stuff. And Eric is a psychologist and a psychologist journalist. He's one of the guys at Psychology in Paris, and is the psychological consultant of Disneyland Paris. And in addition, is a classical concert pianist. And so in 1988, I think it was, and I was in Paris and was talking to Eric, and he said that he had been playing a concert and that he got out of his body, just suddenly out of his body, and went up in this light. And he said then 17 minutes later, he came back to the piano and 3 pieces had been played, but he had been in this light. And so Eric being very modest, I said, well, how did the people enjoy the music? And he said, oh, well, yes, they seem to. Where happily his sister was there, he'd been to the concert. And she said people were jumping up and down and yelling and screaming. So he said, being a psychologist, he said, well, if this has happened to me, it's happened to other people too. So he asked around among his friends who were operatic singers. And he found a lot of them. He wrote a book about this, sadly not published in the US, but published in France back in the 90s, I think, of his interviews with singers who got out of their bodies and went into a transcendent state during performing great music.
Hey, you two are wonderful. I'm happy to have you back on anytime in 2020.
Yeah.
You're gonna tell me when you want to come on. I know you've got a schedule, so we're gonna go to the last 10 minutes here. I'm gonna show one random photo. If you ever come to Austin, Texas, there's Stubbs Barbecue, and there's a concert place, and you get modern concerts. This is a little amphitheater for 1,500 people. It's a happy place. It was Two Door Cinema Club out of the UK, or it was the only French successful alternative band, M83. Happy, not raining, and those are not orbs necessarily. Angels, if you can go beyond orbs. Simon & Schuster once said to me, orbs, and I was like, okay. And that's the way we cope. There's different lingo we use. Some is acceptable, some's not. Everything's good. Everyone is good where they are. But I want to mention no limits is what I'm about for folks. How do you describe it too for... I don't mean a message of hope necessarily. It doesn't have to get too touchy-feely, but I am looking for touchy-feely. What's your reminder to everybody to maybe live more now? Don't put it off. Paul, what's your inspirational message here for everyone?
Wow. Well, I would say that reasonably speaking, we all have a fear of death. Okay, so I don't think it's realistic to tell an audience that they shouldn't fear death, because I don't think that's possible. But instead, what I always tell them is to study the literature that indicates survival of bodily death, and to talk to those who have had NDEs or shared death experiences. They're all around you. I promise you, to bring this subject up in a group is to bring them out of the woodwork. And you'll be surprised that you did. Yeah. Because it's so amazing. It gives you so much hope. Definitely gives you hope.
Yeah. I love that.
I remind them that fear is just a lack of knowledge. And so, yeah, don't fear education, because in the end, education is your friend. Yeah, I think that would be my inspirational message.
And Raymond, what's your inspirational message? Keeping it simple, you know, everyone's busy. I think that's been part of humanity's path as we know
My
it.
My inspirational message is that this thing does work out in the end, and that part of it, it seems to be always some kind of conflict or in it, but that through life you really can develop this situation where at first the intuition of the illusory nature of it comes to you in a flash, and then the dog outside barks or the cop car comes wheeling by, and then you get immersed again, because this thing we're in, it's immersive. But what I found is that over just by practicing, you can get both tracks going simultaneously. You can watch it like knowing of its illusory character. Mm-hmm. And also that it comes out in the end as this kind of revision of it, where you see the same thing in a different perspective. And that you still can feel it even when you're no longer, when you are still immersed in it, but that you constantly have that realization that it's a movie. Yeah.
I would add, people during their day are unconsciously doing incredible feats of letting go, but their ego, their intellect, the psyche, what did I skip? There's another word in there, whatever. A lot of thinking up top, our judging side of us that precludes all real possibility. We don't give ourselves credit for just how amazing we are, even if it's flipping a light switch. I would argue we're the light switch, but flip that around. The heart would be on. And the off part is, and I'm not knocking thinking. We're all going to do tons of it. It's a waste of energy, half of it. And when your thinking's fantastic, you're down here. That's when you're creative and hitting the home run and writing the book chapter that you've been putting off for a month. Welcome to delay. Welcome to the human condition. I'm going to blow some sage. We've done this on every show. We did it before the show to make sure it worked. I'm going to invite the audience at home as usual. I've only got one suggested rule or idea to set your intent to make this happen. I can't even think of my words right now. Ask angels, ask the universe. If you don't mind unconditional love angels, ask them to make it nice, get you out of your head into your heart and to get that schnoggin or really your heart working to let some sage come through. But if you're gutsy, ask for some flowers or the beach smell. Maui from 20 years ago, you weren't there for a while. You guys are going to do great. You're going to catch this. Paul, tell us, we know that Raymond's in Sarasota, Florida. Paul, where are you around the country right now?
In Scottsdale, Arizona.
There we go. So, I mean, look, indigenous tribes all over the planet have been doing this stuff for thousands of years or longer. And we're kind of just, as Western society goes, playing catch up for allowing with a capital A. Here's a little bit of lit sage. Catch what you can catch. And Raymond, what are you catching at your end?
Well, I'm sage guy, so I smell it. Yeah.
And Paul, are you catching anything more than sage and hibiscus, or?
No, I'm catching the early, when you first lit it. That's what I'm catching, which I like that anyway.
It's funny. Some people, when I'm lighting it, taste it on their mouth. I mean, not everybody has a working schnoggin, so it still breaks through what we think our barriers are. If this is surgically, this happened when you were 19, and colorblind people have seen color, the auras thing. We won't do auras today, but I'm inviting you back to play around more, but also give us your experience. You've shared in a lot of other people's experiences, but whether you knew it or not, as you set about down this path over the decades, you gained experience. And I'm going to end with this. Can you share with us again? Everything is about expansion, growth, more love, more capacity for love. Even if we turn our back to people, certain situations we could have done better. Can you talk to us about this personal growth that you've enjoyed? And then, Paul, a personal question for you. Could there be another documentary in the works down the line? Don't tell us what it is unless what would you say at a cocktail party tomorrow night? If you had a project in the hopper, I'm sure you've always got a dozen. What's one we could look forward to, perhaps, if the stars align as a documentary? Because you are a documentary filmmaker, and you and Raymond have worked on much more than books. You've been...
we have, yeah.
Yeah, so this is 35 years of cooperation, so you can finish each other's sentences. But back to the big picture on expansion, consciousness. How can we pump the brakes more personally? Every one of us out there, even a 40-year veteran intuitive, needs to pump the brakes more to slow down, because then everything that's real happens.
Yeah, I know a way of slowing down. Let's give up this stuff about love your enemies, forgiveness. It's all that. And listen, let me tell you about this experience I had in 1967 or 68, which was a real astonishing wake up to me. And it was, I was in Charlottesville, Virginia. I was a graduate student of philosophy. It was 67 or 68, and a Broadway musical comedy traveling troupe came through Charlottesville for a one-night thing. And I don't even remember which Broadway musical comedy it was. But what I remember about it, it had the most delicious comic villain, complete with a black high-top hat and a black cape, right? And he was just so palpably mean. Okay, now the curtain comes down, the show is over, the hero and heroine come out, and and then the supporting actors and actresses came out in that swoop they make through the stage, and people like, and then the spotlight and the villain came out. And I was sitting on the front row. So this was even more, well, it was silence. I mean, dead silence. And it's, of course, it seemed like it lasted for a minute but I'm sure just a couple of seconds. But then since I was on the front row, I heard like numerous people at different parts of the audience all kind of go, and then then you hear a few people, and then it gets louder and louder. And he got the most thunderous applause of all because that shift that you make. So I say, it's like you don't necessarily need to forgive your enemies here. I mean, use them for what they're worth, or it's like it's to experience. I thought I was finished with hate until recently, and maybe in 2016. I don't want to say anything more than that, but then I developed this hatred, and oh my God, I thought I was beyond that. But no, the folks you hate, they have some sort of role in that bigger picture. It's like that villain in your life is gonna show up in a whole different context in your life with you. But for now, see, I've through this insight, I've come to say, well, okay, it's all right to dwell on my hostile parts of this because it's just part of the show. And so that's my insight into it.
Well, I used to write things down in a diary in 1993 when I first moved back to New York City. I did like 19 years there, public relations, Wall Street for a little bit. And I can't explain. I mean, the concept of non-duality, it took me 23 years to get it defined. I'm not an idiot. I'm actually sharp. I taught myself algebra and I took calculus in ninth grade, but I might as well be an idiot for all this. Here's the quote it's from India, Siddha Katrapa. Whatever the yogin sees is his instruction, and realization that all he sees is unborn. That is the most excellent guru. Innocence is the way to realize non-duality, for here the effects of virtue and vice are one. And I just wanted to mention, I loved your stage reference. It's a shift in consciousness, whether it's from a negative experience, a near-death experience, a shared death experience, all your research, or smaller stuff, the pettiness of life, or just our career, workplace, our fixation in achievement or failure, that everything is our instruction and opportunity for growth. Good luck remembering to remember if you remember when you remember. And that's borrowing from Songyal Rinpoche. I only learned how to pronounce that correctly recently. I've been saying it wrong for a decade. But he said, remember to remember. He's taught it for 35 years. Paul, what's your final note? We might do a couple angels here in a second, or Einstein. But what's your final big picture tie-in to this as well?
Well, years ago, I was working in Egypt on a documentary film about Jesus in Egypt, where I followed the apocryphal trail from Israel halfway down into Egypt. And I spent some time with the Coptic Pope, at the time Pope Shenouda. He's since passed. And we were talking, and I said, I tried to corner him on spirituality. I said, how do you define spirituality? And he thinks for a minute, and he says, well, you know what? Spirituality is like water. You can't describe it. You can't really taste it, but you know you need it. And to me, that was what he was telling me was surrender. Surrender to your needs. Don't analyze things too much. And because you can actually kill things by analyzing them, let's face it. And I found that to be a really great quote from him. It's one that stuck with me.
Well, Joseph Campbell, The Power of Myth, his chat with Bill Moyers, he was my graduation speaker at Middlebury. But poor Bill was like in a crop duster compared to the F-18 that Joe was flying. And anyone can meet and see Joe. He's part of that crew. I'm going to put up just a couple. I said we'd do this maybe before the show, and we did it before the show. So I'm going to just quickly put up a couple photos. People can let go. Just ask for ask a question, get an answer, ask for a hug, feel 1 million different ways to feel a goosebump energy transaction. We've done this on all the other shows. But here's an angel. Take this with a grain of salt. If you can just suspend disbelief for 1 second, but people watching this show, I think, are doing it. An angel named Joy is the ambassador communicator here to help us just trust and let go. She's the emotion Joy. And Raymond, Paul, if you want to ask a question, if you want to share the answer, it can stay private with you. But if you do want to get some sort of an energetic transaction, let me know what it is. You can ask for a whoosh or the smell of flowers. No more lit sage. And Paul, what are you getting first? It might be a reminder, like a mantra, just, hey, be joy more, or make sure you go for that walk. What are you getting for yourself?
I'm getting this visual. She's actually, as I look at that, is coming out.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm getting, is her image is coming out.
Beautiful. And these will change color and move, but a historical photo, I will do Audrey Hepburn, because everyone, I use her and I use the Sai Baba photo from 100 years ago. Thank God we had cameras.
Yeah, my wife would
smile, an eyebrow goes up, and you're like, wait a second, it's not possible. We all know photographs can't move. And I love that, because that just shatters our whatever we call up here. Okay. Raymond, what are you getting from Joy?
Well, the same thing that I did before, just contact. Yeah, just like I see.
Perfect.
Her. Yeah.
I'll do Charlotte real fast, an older angel with words meant to help you expand. If it's third form in Canada or third grade in America, think of her as Mrs. Wilson, whoever your favorite was. You're not in trouble. But ask anything you want. Ask for a smell. Ask for a feeling. You can get your hand held. It's up to you. Here it is. The theme of the whole thing. What will you allow for, whether it's in life or in this moment, or the same thing? And Paul, what are you getting from Charlotte?
It looks like a circle of beads. That's what I'm getting. I'm trying not to get that, but that's what I'm getting.
Okay. And Raymond?
The figure I see in there has sort of a headdress on. I see the face, but it's kind of underneath the headdress. Yeah, it seems, maybe, I don't know what kind of figure it was, but it was a personal figure.
Okay, and I'm going to do a guardian angel. This is an actual silhouette. I've got her in different ways, a ball of light, and they're metallic balls of light with faces in them. If it's Charlotte and her on my book cover, Listening to Angels. Here's Min, Pacific Princess, light waves of energy and water from pretty far out, but still an angel, unconditional love, not here to interfere. But Paul, you can specifically ask, hey, what do I need to know in life right now? And hear a little whisper or a reminder on something. It might sound like your own voice for 1 second. The second you let go, you get actual personality. Good luck with that, people, but let go. And that's Min, M-I-N-N, like Minnesota, the Lakota Sioux word for water. And I'll put up Einstein's photo next. But from Min, Paul, are you getting anything? Are you feeling something? And you can get the smell of an ocean as well.
I'm kind of hung up on the name, because the name is an Egyptian god, actually, Min.
Oh, yeah. And her full name is Minwala, because Awala is a Polynesian morning glory, and Ua and La and Hawaiian are rain and sun. So it's water rainbow, water morning glory. It's a mouthful for Americans, so Min works fine.
No, nothing here.
Okay. And Raymond?
Well, again, it's just contact. I see the person.
Right. I do see the person.
Good enough. We'll jump to good old Einstein. Now, whether they're unconditional love, there's no hierarchy in my book. It's all a lot of love, a lot of light, but maybe a little bit different vibration or personality. Here's Einstein. You can hear him, feel him, ask what you want to ask, hear a little whispered response. I like to keep it open-ended and simple. Practice listening before you give your hard questions, and have pen and paper handy if you would. He has a lot of humor for folks. Anything? And it's okay if not. You're in the middle of a show. You've been put on the spot.
Yeah. So, I mean, I will tell you what is coming to my mind. Okay.
Yeah.
Rock and roll without the music.
I love that. See, now that's trusting. So thank you for sharing out loud. Raymond, anything from Einstein? This will be the last
Yeah,
one.
I know, but it's something I've already known about him. When I was a kid, I wanted to be two things: an astronomer and a comedian. And I actually did get to be a comedian, and that's what he wanted to be.
Mm-hmm.
You wanted to be a comedian?
He wanted to be in the movies, but the U.S. government, he was hilarious. They said he would have been a great movie star, but that the U.S. just didn't think that that would be proper for their chief scientist to
The reigning genius.
be a comedian in the movies.
Three Stooges film, it wouldn't work.
Exactly. Well, look, thank you both for being on the show. This has been Angels, Positivity, and Love. We've had Raymond Moody, MD, and we've had Paul Perry, documentary filmmaker. Both of you have worked together since '88, but you've also had other best-selling books, Paul. And Raymond, thank you for all the work you've done. You've done us a service by just opening up the possibility that there's more in and around us. And you've helped people also relax with their own personal stories. They don't have to be ostracized anymore.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And thanks for the folks listening in. Thank you so much for listening.
Yeah, thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
Thank you again. We'll hopefully see you soon in 2024.
Thanks, Michael.